Well, we are mostly focused on hardwood history in college basketball. When my old friend John Zilvinskis reached out and wanted to talk NBA, I couldn't resist dipping a toe into the early part of the season. It feels like a continuation of the historic bubble season and will certainly be a part of hardwood history. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the 19-9 podcast. I am Aaron Meyer. I am here with my old friend John Zilvinskis. Can I call you Jay-Z still? I mean, do you still get referred to as that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. I knew him as Jay-Z, not that Jay-Z, but our Jay-Z here on 19-9. Wanted to talk to him a little bit about the NBA, but first tell us how things are going there in upstate New York and what's on your mind.
Yeah, things are going, as well as can be, considering we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast. But today, President Biden was confirmed by Congress. And so thinking about, kind of all the stressors related to that. So I guess I'm as good as anyone can be in this uncertain time in history. Yeah. But
always feels day to day. It always feels good to talk basketball. I know that one of the things have repeated throughout the pandemic is how this has been important. To me, you think about sports and leisure as distractions oftentimes, but oftentimes they too are those refueling moments that help us to get to the important things too, the balance in our lives, that the happy way stations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think too, sports. I think Roger Ebert said that movies are the ultimate empathy machine, and I think sometimes sports can be that way too, right? Like you watch a player succeed or struggle, and you can kind of put yourself in their shoes. And especially for a lot of viewers who are watching individuals who either look or don't look like them, it can be this way to kind of make these connections with individuals they see as their heroes, on the court. So, I think that could be the most valuable part of sports, otherwise sometimes you think okay, so what are we doing here thinking about, a game that adults are either paid to play, or you focus on college students, right, that are, given a scholarship to play, right? So
it is the way that it plays out though in a game by game basis. I think that, drama is one of those propulsive forces, and you get to see that in a microcosm in each game. And so that the energy that surrounds that is what we feed off of, right? There's like a life force that is generated when there's an ultimate outcome to something. And I think that that's an important part that you can capture. And I think that's what you're saying helps you to cheer for those guys, right? Because there's an outcome that you desire that's going to happen. That's inevitable.
Yeah, I like that. I like thinking about these, kind of like broader forces. Your description here of the cohesion of the sporting experience and then definitiveness, right? So some person wins, some person loses, some person makes the definitive shot. And then also too, so take it on the other side of the screen or the other side of the arena, right? Like you have all these community metrics where you're connecting with people watching the game, watching your favorite team, and, having those shared moments, right? Like that's really powerful. And as you said, palpable too, right? Oh.
Yeah. So you had one thing in the notes that you added about the obligation for student athletes or for the NBA players. I was watching The Jump just before this, and they were responding to what happened yesterday. Curious what you think or what your perspective is on that. I know I've shared mine a little bit. I think that I definitely feel like the athletes are empowered more today, and I appreciate their perspective on things. I think it is tricky though, of course, because just like me, I don't like wading into it too much because I only follow it tangentially, and so I think you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble when you come off as an expert in something that you are just an observer on. And I think that some of the guys are truly experts and want to be involved, and that's awesome. But I think that you have to be careful. Your station can provide you an outsized influence over something that you might not know that much about in the end.
Yeah. So I pitched this question to you to kind of discuss whether or not players, professional or in college, have an obligation to respond to, specifically yesterday's storming of the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit more about the college side of things.
Mm-hmm.
In the NBA, which I follow more closely, like we see this real spectrum of results, right? So, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, weigh in about the double standard exhibited during the chaos in the Capitol. And then we see the players from the Milwaukee Bucks and the Detroit Pistons who took a knee after tip-off. Meanwhile, Tim McMahon of ESPN reports James Harden asked for his reaction to what happened in Washington, D.C. today, responds, I didn't see it, right? Like, so there's like real kind of like spectrum of engagement. And I don't know, Erica, my partner, and I were talking about this and trying to think about, well, does James Harden owe it, to fans to respond to these like bigger global issues? Or, as you're suggesting too, are players responsible to weigh in on topics that they, maybe don't personally elect to or don't want to talk to about in public spaces? But then I also think too that I don't know, I was trying to think that there's some sort of benefit to NBA players to using their format, their venue to really engage with these things. And in some ways, I think it can be equated to, or it can be valued in terms of social capital.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, right. So I have been a Malcolm Brogdon fan, since he was consistently scoring and the Bucks when he played for the Bucks. And then I was interested. He had this charity to bring fresh water to communities in Africa. So I knew that he was socially active, and so I was really excited to see like how he engaged this summer with BLM. Meanwhile, I think about the Boston Celtics player Jaylen Brown, who I haven't been a big fan of his game, and I've been kind of skeptical of like where
he's playing amazing this year.
Right. Well, he's definitely picking me up now. But in the first couple of years, I was like, okay, so this is the number 2 pick. This is like all of the equity that the Celtics had,
right?
Right? Like, what is it going to result in? And not to mention, and we shouldn't forget, it was a pick that they were shopping at the time that nobody was picking up. Right? So. But, so this summer, right, he emerges as like a social leader in BLM. And, for me, I think that really like enriched my interest in him as a player. And I think too, we can then talk about LeBron James, whose, social activist behaviors, I think, have really distinguished him from players in the 90s, but, maybe not so much from historic players like Bill Russell, who was involved in civil rights in the 60s. So I don't know, so let me ask you, I'm trying to wrap my head around what do you think college students are going to do or are doing that play basketball? Are they going to engage with this at all? Do they engage with this?
They're in a trickier position. I think there's a couple forces at work, right? I think that the NBA players make an amount of money now that is so much more and insulates them from the things that could happen, although they're still taking risk, and I don't want to lose sight of that. There is a risk that they're all assuming, in this, and because they're almost like mini corporations in and of themselves. But I think that they also have, like you said, opportunity, and they have just the ability to access PR people and all kinds of different things to learn about how to respond to this. I think for college players, still they speak more through the coach, and they speak more as a team because there is a camaraderie. I mean, you're not just seeing these guys. It's not your job where you're just a part of a franchise. You are part of a team more still in college, where you're living with these guys, eating meals with these guys all the time. And some NBA teams do that, but I think there's more of them that are actually adults and have their own lives and families. It's just a different set of circumstances. When you're in college and you're on a team, you have an obligation to yourself, but to the team more, if that makes sense. Like some of these NBA players even seem like their own thing in and of themselves. LeBron James is as big as the NBA is in some ways, and maybe that could work against him sometimes, but it certainly has given him the freedom to say some, important and outsized things.
You mentioned, kind of coaches in this equation, right? And so that's a real distinction between the professional game,
Mm-hmm.
and the collegiate game. Today on the Dan Le Batard podcast, Stan Van Gundy came on just to talk about, what was going on. And I think we see that in a few of the coaches around the league, like Coach Popovich,
Mm-hmm.
Steve Kerr as well, speaking on the activism that occurred over this summer. So in college, though, I guess there's a different dynamic, right? Like college coaches are getting paid
Yep.
millions of dollars. College players are subsidized through scholarship. And I guess I wondered, if you thought, and I think in a lot of ways too, right? Like college coaches will be the face of a team, right? They're
For
the
sure.
individuals that get press conferences after the game, as opposed to players. And players might have press conferences after a win to kind of like celebrate, right? Like you see the national champion guy smiling at the end of the game. But, typically that's not the dynamic after a game. It's the coach that's getting interviewed and kind of answering for the team. Do you think that coaches will comment on these things? And I guess I also kind of wanted to know, like, I would love for you to help me understand like the dynamics of coaches deciding to comment or not, right? Like on one hand, these individuals are freestanding millionaires, and I think that they would have some like equity to build with prospective students by speaking out about some of these things.
Yeah.
On the other hand, college coaches answer to boosters who may have voted for Trump, may benefit from Trump's policies,
Sure.
and quite frankly, don't want a coach that speaks on anything other than basketball.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the college coaches are more in the middle ground than the NBA because there isn't a larger governing body as well. I mean, the NCAA and the conferences are so much more fractured, where Adam Silver has clearly put a line in the sand so that that you can fall in line behind that or use that as cover if you want to look at a more cynical view of it. But the college coaches are those freestanding entities. Maybe they report to those boosters or have talk to their athletic director and are getting marching orders from there. But I think that it's just a different dynamic. I don't know that they're feel as compelled to. They should if they want to. I think that people should speak out. I think that part of what if you want to, depending on how you view this, the problem here is that people have become less willing to talk to one another and work through things. I mean, problems are problems, but to get through them, you have to be willing to talk to people, right? Like that, the problem is the fractured nature of it, not the differences. I mean, the differences have always existed. It's when you stop talking to the other person that the problems become insurmountable.
Yeah, and I wondered like if there was like a real lane, right? Like so these college coaches are meeting with high school kids and usually right like their family, right? I've heard, like they'll do the living room pitch where they're trying to convince like those standout stars to come. And for some sought after athletes, it's a little bit of a car wash, right? Like they might have visits from multiple coaches. And I wondered if there would be a way for a coach to make a lane, right? Because they can't distinguish themselves in terms of package, right? They can't offer. I mean, I guess between booster handouts, they may be able to, but the coaches themselves, right, like can't offer, directly offer different packages to athletes.
Well,
no, is that not true?
Well, there've been some phone calls, like some of the recent controversies. They've been on the call saying, "Hey, give DeAndre Ayton $125,000." Then he said he didn't. He didn't actually mean that. Yeah, he didn't actually mean that, but.
That's right.
He did say it.
So, that's right. Okay. So yes, I guess there is like I just wonder if like there would be a coach that they could like strengthen their case to also say, hey, and I'm also a coach who thinks about or talks about these issues. As you mentioned, right? Like having sustained dialogue, but maybe there's not space for that when you're thinking about money, resources, playing time.
It could be tough too. Just to, the coaching is such a demanding gig in general with how much they're doing. Again, I wonder how much, time and energy you have to put into these things. It's not that you shouldn't, but I do wonder, like the coaches, especially college coaches, tend to engage with the local communities as much as possible too. And NBA has gotten really good about that too. And, maybe there's a lesson in that too for all of us in that we should be engaging more on the local levels rather than just throwing out these kind of national spotlight takes, because they're interesting to hear, but I don't know how much they move the needle in any direction. When LeBron James says, tweets at Kelly Loeffler that he might buy the team. I mean, okay. I mean, it definitely is an interesting tweet, but if he, the real interesting part would be is if he did it right, then that changes things. Just saying it is again, like, becomes part of the conversation and lets you know where he stands and maybe empowers other people, but it doesn't necessarily change things. And I think that, the real change comes from bottom up. I don't know. That's just my perspective on it.
Yeah. I guess too, like, I was thinking about Matt Patricia this summer, right? So former coach now of the Detroit Lions, during when BLM was heating up over the summer, said, canceled practice and said that they were going to kind of do an internal dialogue day. Mm-hmm. And some speculated that would then equate to, maybe he'd be more likely to retain his job, right? Like he had made connections with the players, had this, but then his terrible record didn't save him. I don't, I don't know.
Yeah.
What is it? And I wonder too how coaches then like internalize something like that. Do they make fun of Matt Patricia for like, maybe you should have paid a little bit more attention to football. Is
Probably.
that the dialogue that's happening? Or is it like,
I mean, sports
is like,
from my perspective, sports is in the end an entertainment product. So, people listen to Tom Cruise, even if he's a Scientologist, if his movies are good and entertaining. I think if coaches are winning, they're going to, they keep their platform. The reason LeBron James's platform is so big is because he's unbelievable. Someday he won't be, and he'll still have a voice, but it won't be the same. So, I think that's why he should use it how he wants to while he's got it. I think that's if that's how he's feeling, right?
Yeah, and I think you've epitomized like a question for this generation is like, can you separate the art from the artist? Right? Like, and I think now it's so much more difficult to do. Right?
I try to still, because I think that you can't have just a naive take on it, but if you think too deeply about it in the moment, I think you can lose some of the just fun and pure adulation of it, right? Like there's so much going on. So our brains are still not, at least mine isn't big enough to see the whole picture when I'm just watching a orange ball bounce and going through an iron hoop, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like the pure, like just enjoyment of watching a basketball player and watching a player just, like wreck on the court. And it's so funny because like so Eric and I have League Pass and we watch probably like 3 games a week. So, like we're, semi-fans, right? But like all the time when we start, especially like in the lulls of basketball, now that we're not in playoff basketball, like we immediately start with do I like that player or not? And part of that is generated by like what we see on the screen, how they interact. And then part of that is like the narrative, right? Like I've been a staunch Harden defender. I really like his game.
Really?
I like watching, which I know is controversial, right? Like in sports circles. But now that he's, doing this, I guess he's not holding out, right? But he's demanding a trade.
Yeah, well, let's get into Harden right now. So oh man, this is perfect. Is he going to end up on the Rockets? And are you still defending him now?
Yes. Well, so the defense part that's starting to wane is like, right, like this, like, okay, so he wants out, even though it seemed, even though the franchise was built around him, and catapulted him to
they're waiting on the plane is waiting on him, like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But if you're the multi-million-dollar like entity, the plane waits for you. Right? Like if you're
apparently
like, they're not going there to see the owner.
You might have been in that position. I've never been in that position before.
I am demanding that the plane waits for me. I've certainly walked around as if I was the multi-million-dollar entity. But usually the plane leaves without me. But like I think like. And without James Harden, though, the Rockets would be what? Like the Orlando Magic, right? Like
probably. Although Christian Wood is looking like that is a nice signing for him. I just don't. I guess what it always confuses me about some of the guys that want out. Like I can understand it sometimes, and then other times I'm like, what are you hoping to get? Because you got to give up something to get him, and so he's just, I don't know where he's aiming at right now. He seems to just not like Houston for some reason, and I would be calling his bluff because I do think he's awesome, and I have defended Harden some too, and I just don't see why you would want him to leave, it's sort of that known unknown we were talking before off the air. Like what is this known out there that's going to be so much better than James Harden? Like, he's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And I think that most people would say if you're the franchise, you're going to look like a loser.
Yeah.
When you trade away James Harden, just because you'll never get anything back that's equivalent to James Harden. I mean, I think that, New Orleans got bailed out so much by getting the number 1 pick and getting Zion, because otherwise they would have looked like this just terrible losers who had to farm, like AD cultivate him to then give him away for. Yeah, these pieces that are okay. But not
even Brandon Ingram, who has become awesome, is still not AD. Like, even if they had that, it's sort of the Luka, Trae Young. It's like, well, Trae Young's really awesome. I'm like, yeah, but he's not Luka, so you're still going to have to live with that. Yeah. So Brandon Ingram forever is going to be like, yeah, but you traded AD away for him, so that's tough.
By and large, I'm in favor of player empowerment. I like that I see characters, right? That players, the characters in the narrative of the NBA, but like that players, ask out, and that they're not beholden to stay with franchises that seem inept to be able to build around them. But I think one of the things that's kind of become lost in this, though, is the role of the GM, and when players say, well, we're gonna team up and we're gonna win the championship. I think sometimes they undervalue the GM who has to then build the pieces around those individuals and to make a complete team that can win. I mean, the old GM of the Bulls on the Michael Jordan documentary, right? Like,
yes,
right, for saying that, like,
gosh,
the teams win championships or whatever.
Jerry
Organizations
Krause.
Win championships. Players.
Yeah.
And and so and also too, like in the documentary, he's such an unlikable character compared to like admiration for Michael Jordan.
If you're going to get compared to Michael Jordan, you're in trouble already.
yeah, that's right. But like, I do think there's something to that. You think about the Heat, right? So the 3 big stars get together, but then they have who's the point guard? Anyways, they have like these, they have this incomplete team that ultimately doesn't win the championship in the first year. And, so I think
Mario Chalmers you're thinking of?
Well, yeah, they had Mario Chalmers, and then they had Mike Bibby.
Oh, Bibby.
In his like final year of NBA playing, who really struggled in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that's partly what you get, right? Like when 3 max players want to get together, then you don't have a.
You're gonna have to gut the team. Yeah. The thing is, though, this has been my argument for a while, because I think that the NBA, one of the things that they haven't been doing with the player empowerment is that they're neglecting the fans a little bit. Like there's so much emphasis. There's been a thing, and this is zeitgeist in college basketball or pro basketball with the championship culture, and that's great. Like, obviously Jordan kind of started that, and I'm a huge Jordan fan, so that's plays into my fandom partially. But I do think that as a Bulls fan now that has been languishing for like 2 decades since then, I really loved those Derrick Rose teams. Like, they never made it over the hump, they never ended up making it to the championship, but those were fun to watch. Now that they've stunk forever, like, I'd give me those teams back any day. And I just think like Harden and some of these guys like feel that push that they have to win a championship so much when one team's probably still going to win it. I mean, the Lakers are still, I don't know how you feel, but I think they're the class of the NBA this year. They won it last year. I don't see any reason, if they stay healthy, that they won't win it again this year, no matter where Harden goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you with the Lakers. I think that they've added to the roster in the offseason in substantial ways. I think they'll actually be better than last year. But I think that I totally think you're right that the player empowerment has obfuscated like the value for fans, and especially too, this realization that I think all of the players of this generation are getting to, which is that, I might not win a championship. Winning a championship is hard.
Yeah. There's
only one champion per year, and I'm only going to play 15 years, and I might not be it, especially if you are standing in the shadows of dynasties like the Golden State Warriors, the Miami Heat,
LeBron James,
James, period, right? Like, you just might not go.
I mean, the Celtics, you talked about Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I mean, they got to the Game 7 Eastern Conference Finals, and they haven't really been back to that point, what if that's the closest they ever come? Are they bad players because of that? I mean, those two guys are awesome to watch. Bill Simmons right now has been railing. He doesn't want James Harden on his team. And, because especially now, because Jaylen Brown is the one on the table for it. And he's like, I don't want to cheer for James Harden. And it's just like, do you sacrifice just a team you like for a team that could win the championship that you may end up not liking? Like they had Kyrie, did not like him. And there's just something about having a team that you just like too. I mean, I just loved those Bulls teams. Like they didn't end up winning, but I don't know if I would have liked being a Heat fan more with the put together team. I haven't had like a put together team like that yet. So I don't know how I'd feel. Like I'm an IU fan, not a Kentucky fan. So the Kentucky feels like that put together every year, would I be better off like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you bring up two good points. Like, one is this idea of like just fan connection to following a team, rooting for them, seeing how they do, and enjoying like the intricacy of these games. I think one of the things the NBA has done this season that has been really great is they're doing these like back-to-back games where the teams play each other 2 nights in a row, or
baseball style,
Yeah, and it builds like kind of that playoff tension as you see teams match up to each other. You see them get mad. You see them like blow a game 1 of 2, and then they come out and try to win. Like there's narrative there, and I think that it engenders what you're describing, which is that you can sit and follow a team and kind of see how they do night to night, and that in and of itself is enjoyable, even if your team doesn't win the championship.
Yeah.
The second piece too is like this fascinating question about would you trade Jaylen Brown for James Harden. And I think that one of the things that fans really struggle with is, the idea of trading possibility for like essentially, cashing in your chips, as opposed to the fantasy that Jaylen Brown and Tatum might eventually be 1A, 1B, championship level players.
Yeah.
You're getting that for James Harden, even though it might be a limited time. There are concerns about his play in the playoffs, but what you're getting at least for a couple of seasons. Where with Brown, you live in this. He
hasn't sustained this level. Yeah, he's at kind of a high enough level where it makes you pause right now, but he's never sustained this. So you're kind of holding on to the belief that this is what he is going to be going forward, permanently.
Yes. Or even worse, you have a fantasy that we have our Kevin Durant and our Russell Westbrook. They just need a few more years to get older, and then they'll be.
Then they never
MVPs.
do.
Yeah, right. They never They never go to that level. Yeah, and I think that's tough for fans to just try to cash in all of that hope. I mean, I think it's it's this interesting conversation. One of the questions I had here was thinking about who won the Pierce and Garnett trade, the Nets or the Celtics. Because like right now, the Nets look like they're closer to a championship.
Oh my gosh!
Celtics, right? They're so good. But like you would have, I don't know, 5 years ago.
What a sojourn, though. Like I don't want to take. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if I want to walk through that wilderness to get to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving all these years later. Like, oh God.
Yeah, or do you want to be the Orlando Magic, 8th seed every year, out in 5 games? Right? Like, is that worse than being a Nets fan? I don't know. Who was the number 1 pick? I just tore his ACL yesterday too. Did you see that? Oh no!
Gosh, what's his name? He was with Philly.
Markelle Fultz.
Markelle Fultz. Yeah, just tore his ACL yesterday. Ugh.
After signing that huge deal.
I know. Stinks. And he was playing better too, but that's rough. Well, let's talk about a couple of other high draft picks. Keeping on the future, we gotta get work Zion in here always. What is he like? Have you watched him yet this year? I was curious about him last year. Loved watching him at Duke. He was incredible, a revelation for a college player. And then I'm not sure now. And is he better than John Morant?
Yeah, right. So yeah, the narrative of Zion is incredible, right? You think about Duke, it's appointment viewing, right? Anytime he's playing.
Yeah, the president, Obama showing up, sitting in front row. Yeah.
That's right. Like you have to, right? And then last year, he's shelved, injured most of the season. And you really, you always worry when a number 1 pick is missing their rookie season. You think about, like Greg Oden, and you're just like, okay, so what do we have
Not off to
here?
a good start, yeah.
Right. Or you have concerns like the 76ers, where they're kind of like constantly having their number one picks, kind
Sit
of
out
sit
a
for a
year.
year.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe they're just rehabbing or adjusting, etc. And then John Morant comes in and is just electric last year. And he really becomes appointment viewing, right? Like if you're surfing through your league pass, Eric and I will look at each other and be like, Grizzlies game? We're
Yeah,
like,
I know.
yeah,
Weird, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I don't think that was anticipated. Not only that, but like he takes his team, which is not very good. Obviously, they had the number 2 pick the year before,
Right.
and earned the number 2 pick, right? And then they are fighting for the 8th seed in the playoffs in the bubble, right? Like pretty incredible stuff, especially in a really competitive West. And then and now this year, right, we kind of have the reverse, right? John Morant's out for a couple of weeks, 6 weeks or so, and then we have Zion Williamson. And it's tough to tell, right? Because he's kind of in mothballs. I think that people who follow statistics in the NBA would make like a definitive case, for one or the other.
He's fun to watch. Like I like watching him because this is one of those things that as the NBA trended towards those statistical models where teams are shooting. I think there's a bunch of teams now shooting over 43s a game. That the dynamism of him just rumbling, stumbling, bumbling to the basket or spinning and bashing into people is just fun, right? Like it just adds an element of difference to a game that's just fun to watch. But I don't know. I still wonder how effective it's ultimately going to be. How does he raise the ceiling of his team that much? I loved his playmaking in college and his defense, and it doesn't seem like those two things have emerged as much as I thought they would have, at this point. So I don't know.
Yeah, let me pick your brain about this. So you follow college ball, and help me understand. Do you think we'd be having this conversation about John Morant as you watched him in college and going to the draft? So like the setup to the draft, right, is that, Zion is the, number 1 pick, hands down.
Yeah.
Right. And then John Morant, probably the number 2 pick. Right?
Yep.
Most people would say.
Yeah.
But I don't know that people thought that he would be in the same league. It seemed like a nice, like, consolation prize. But I don't know. You tell me. I mean, you watched him in college. Did you think that he would be this special?
No. I mean, he definitely was going to be special. Like those two were a lot of the draft guys do tiers now, and so they'll put people like in tier 1, tier 2. Like so, tier 1 is like multiple time All NBA. Tier 2 is like maybe you make an All-Star game. Tier 3 is like starter and so on. So he was like a tier 1 player. So people knew like he was going to be probably if he stayed healthy, multiple time All-Star, All NBA guy. He was just his combination of skill set. Like he's an elite playmaker, absolutely elite athlete. His shooting was a concern, but he seems to be passable in that area. So there's no reason that aside from injuries that he's not gonna be really good for a long time.
I see. Okay, so he's living up to expectations.
Yeah,
that you would think.
And the NBA is just predicated on guard play right now. Everything is set up like when you design the rules to enable guards and shooting. Like, guess what's going to be good? A super athletic guard who can make plays. Just
that's right. You're going to make stars here.
Yeah.
And I guess part of the thing, I guess from an NBA perspective, as I only start to pay attention to players either in March Madness or like as the draft like emerges, is John Morant didn't go to a premier basketball program,
right?
I think that can be
he stayed an extra year too. He's a sophomore, so a little different pathway to the NBA for sure. But I think point guards in general, it's a little bit harder. You'll see guys give up on point guards way too soon because it's like one of those positions that sometimes you can jump off the page right away, but it's also something where you have to learn, or you end up on a terrible team with not good players. I think Trae Young's a good example. Like he is starting to look even better than I thought as he gets better players around him because, he's able to use their skill sets to make himself better and make the team better too, which is, I think, kind of the ultimate level for a point guard.
Yeah, I think that's always tough to like differentiate for prospects, when they're on a terrible team, like, like Ben Simmons, right? Like at LSU, and you're just kind of like, well, okay, so what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about like let's go to the other side of the map for college teams, like some of the premier teams, right? So you had this question here about Gonzaga, which is right,
they're
like
unbelievable this year. Yeah, they are so. If you haven't watched the Gonzaga team, I think they're on tonight. I don't know that they're playing anybody good, but they are so good. One of the best college teams I've seen in a long time.
Oh, that's that's great to know. We were unknowledgeable about this. I say we because my partner Erica's a Zags fan.
So she needs to watch them. Oh my gosh, you got to watch them. They're so much fun. They might have. I don't know if he'll end up the number 1 pick in the draft, but definitely Jalen Suggs should go 1 or 2. He's like big 6'5", bruising point guard, super athletic. Could be hopefully to my Bulls next year if they keep going like this. I'm already projecting who I want.
You're at home like sewing a Bulls.
I am, yeah. A Suggs. I've got a dog named Stubbs. I'm thinking about renaming him Suggs if that happens.
That's great. Good. All right. So you put this question in our like rundown notes. Is Gonzaga better than the worst team in the league? Radio hosts like to talk about this. Like, say, like, Alabama beat, the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Exactly, yeah.
So tell me, like, what's the case?
The Detroit Pistons this year. They're just, just a total tragedy of an NBA team. Like, what are they doing? They're put together all wrong. They've got a bunch of guys that probably don't want to be there. They've got a new coach. Like, no fans. They didn't have fans before. Now they have 0 fans in the arena. Like, let's bring Gonzaga in there.
You have to imagine like Blake Griffin. I guess okay. So there are a couple things. Like there's the background, like why you think Gonzaga would win, and then there's the actual like trying to map out like the match itself,
right?
Right. And I have to imagine like Blake Griffin would be like one of 2 ways, right? Like he'd be like, I'm out, hits the bench halfway through the first quarter, and then like
just
leaves because it's preposterous. He doesn't know.
He's got a stand-up gig later that evening. He's got to get to.
That's right. Yeah. Eric, when Blake got traded, Eric had this funny vision of Blake Griffin driving his BMW, a white BMW, like across the country, and like shows up in Detroit like all dirty because he hasn't gotten out of the car. Like, at all. He just keeps driving through, like circling the arena, like in disbelief.
Is this happening?
Yeah. But the other like end of that spectrum is that Blake Griffin's just like, okay, you guys want to do this?
Come on, guys.
He just manhandles a bunch of college kids for like a relentless 40 minutes.
They probably would win. I usually, throw that in the air. I'm like, you guys don't realize that like every guy on an NBA team is basically the best player in the history of that team's that program, right? So, it's kind of like when they do that about high school too. Like, oh, could IMG beat so and so? I'm like, man, no. Every Division I program literally has 12 Division I guys. Like, so if you say IMG has 12 Division I guys, that's exactly what every single college team has. And by the way, you don't know how good they're going to be in college. Some of them will be really good, some of them won't. So they would lose. I think I would just put that in there because I love this Gonzaga team, and it's just fun because they're so good, and there's some bad teams in the NBA this year. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like you talked about, like like the difference in culture, right? Like you have a college team that's predicated on team and working together, living together.
For sure.
And then you have like an NBA team, and especially like a disorganized NBA team that has this constellation of stars who, maybe don't want to be there, don't want to be with that team, don't want to be coached, are thinking about their own stats and where they're going next. So there would be this, I guess like the best example for the NBA would have been like the dream team, right? When they scrimmaged against, like those college all-stars.
Yeah, Weber, Grant Hill,
yeah. And they like put it to them, and the NBA Dream Team was just getting furious. By the fact that they were even like having a contest. Right?
Yeah, they called no foul. They called no fouls. They wouldn't put Jordan in. See, they warped it a little bit. So you'd have to do a little bit of that. But you get it. You put it at Gonzaga, and then you really make Blake Griffin upset. You'd have to go to Washington, and then play at Gonzaga. This is ridiculous.
Trying to get some coffee.
Yeah,
that's great.
All right, let's hit up Philly because they've started out so amazing. We can talk a little bit about them as a team, and then you got to trade. I love throwing out a random trade. So you said we'll start with that. Would Philly trade Ben Simmons, who's been on the kind of shopped out there at least in the media, Ben Simmons and Danny Green for Paul George and Lou Williams? Interesting.
My wrinkles.
I would say no. I think Paul George really hurt himself last year in the playoffs. Damaged his. I just don't see him bring in. But I see what you're going for there because he's a shooter and kind of maybe, again, everybody wants to find a shooter for an Embiid. I don't know.
So wait, I'm sorry. You would say that Philly would say no.
I think Philly says no.
Yeah. Well, so this is probably a great example too of like the possibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you think, Ben Simmons, maybe we have like this generational guy, if he can be unlocked, which, he under the old regime was being stifled, like maybe we have something really magical. But I don't know. Okay, so if you're Philly, right, like you're thinking, okay, so we want to get Embiid a championship. We want to build around him and probably make him happy, right? I think of the two stars,
for sure.
He's the one that you'd probably bank on. And then, okay, so with Paul George, you get a shooter, which Ben Simmons refuses to become.
Right.
And then with Lou Williams, who I think the Clippers have soured on because they've seen the Lou Williams playoff experience enough where they've been maybe disappointed. But he comes off the bench. He does a ton of scoring, which they desperately need. The other thing too, I thought that this might happen from a Clippers perspective, is you'll remember they signed Blake to that huge contract and then immediately shipped him out, And
we're out of here.
Paul George signed that big contract and he's like, I'm the leader of the team.
Yeah.
He's he had that quote where he said that he was in his MVP form. I'm checking Basketball Reference here. I don't see Paul George. Right. But like, it just has all the signs for classic Clippers betrayal, where suddenly he's
stab him in the back
in Philadelphia for 5 years. Right. And then they get, and I don't know, if I was the Clippers, I would be like, oh, the defense of getting Ben Simmons and Kawhi Leonard together would be incredible.
Yeah.
And then you get Danny Green, which maybe is some shooting. I guess, it depends on whether or not you think
he's washed a little bit. So I think he's a little, he looks a little done. He's a little toasted. Like I wouldn't bank on him or make him an important part of the trade. That's a salary filler, like Lou Williams. Again, like if I'm Philly, the reason I don't do it is because, and this is the reason I didn't want to wouldn't have done the Harden thing, because they're asking for too much for Harden. They wanted Ben Simmons and something for Harden, and then you see how they start the season. You're like, do we need James Harden? Like I don't know. They look awesome right now, and I know that in the playoffs it changes because you don't get up and down as much and you have this kind of Ben Simmons problem. But for Harden, I think I would do it. If the trade is different and it's Harden for Simmons and it's basically straight up, I'm gonna do it because I just think that the fit is too good to pass up. But if it's for Paul George, is Paul George even better than Tobias Harris? Like, I don't know.
It's so tough because I think you can talk yourself into Paul George. The other thing too is if you have Tobias Harris, you think anything's better than Tobias Harris. You have this like fantasy, like, we're gonna. If you want to do
Tobias Harris or Paul George, now I'm interested.
I think they do that. It's like
I think they might hang up on that one.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, cool.
All right, let's hit the Suns. The Suns have also been kind of a surprising team as we're getting towards the end here. Chris Paul is one of my favorite players. I'm so happy that he's revitalizing another team here. Would definitely rather have Chris Paul. I just think he's so much fun to watch, and I think the Suns are going to be good. I think he knows how to play basketball. He might not take your team over the finish line, but he's going to make your team good. Like he is like a base. He's like a baseline. If you have him, your team's going to be, and you have other players. He knows how to make them good. You might not like him. He kind of wears out his welcome maybe after a while, but he's gonna be good, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. Right, like, and you see this in the record. You saw it with the Thunder, right? Like this, kind of team of misfit toys that like Chris Paul really organized into a team that made the playoffs. So I think that's the case. I guess kind of like with you, what you were asking earlier about James Harden is like, well, so what are the Suns ultimately trying to do this season, right? Like they're not going to play better than the Lakers or the Clippers, what's a successful season for them? Maybe
get into the playoffs, right? Yeah, get in there. I mean, if I'm a team that's not been in the playoffs for I don't know how many years, and if you've got Devin Booker and Ayton, you need to get those guys some experience in the playoffs. If they're ever going to get over the hump, they have to start cutting their teeth in the playoffs and losing or having some good series against some of these good teams.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that, especially to Court Booker, who is like halfway through his second deal already, like, right, you want to show and generate some success. I think the counterfactual to that would be the Timberwolves, right, which were in the same boat, right, like where they hadn't been in the playoffs for a long time. Right? Jimmy Butler comes in, yells at everybody, gets them to the 8th seed.
Yeah, makes the playoffs with them, by the way.
Like a final, right? It was like a final game plan where they had to beat the Nuggets to get the 8th seed, get smashed, they're out. Butler yells his way out of Minnesota, and now Karl Anthony Towns is just. I mean, I don't know. Was he better for that experience? Right?
Well, I mean, maybe not, but I think that was a little bit different too because they Butler is such a forceful personality. Like if they had Chris Paul right now in Minnesota and Cat was healthy, I think that he would be good because he's, again, like his whole thing is making Cat better. Butler is about himself. Like he does make the team better, but I think that he plays, until he's gotten to the Heat, he hasn't quite found that fit where he is willing to subvert himself more. Although he did on the Bulls too. I don't know. I like Butler. I actually think like Wiggins is pretty soft and Cat is soft too. I just don't like either of those guys. Although Cat's extremely talented. I hope he lands on a team that can unlock him someday. But I don't know. Yeah.
We could spend a full hour talking about Jimmy Butler because I feel similar, like complicated levels of like just love and like total bewilderment about
loves country music. Friends with what's his name, the actor, Ted actor, Mark Wahlberg.
Owns Big Head Coffee.
Exactly. Yes,
a Renaissance man of his time. Yeah,
definitely. All right, well, let's do one more. What do you want to end on?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is a good question. Or I think it's a good question. Is the Luka MVP conversation too early? And then if so, gun to your head, who wins the MVP this season?
Man, that is the MVP is also always about what you said. You need a narrative. It seems like anymore that it develops around a narrative. So Russell Westbrook, you can say, oh, he shouldn't have won it the year he had the triple double, but I don't care what anybody says. That was just a fun story. Like, after he did the triple double a couple more times, it wasn't as interesting. But at the time, it was like, no one's done this since Oscar Robertson. This is cool. Like, he's leading this team that Kevin Durant left. That's just a cool story. So. Luka doesn't look like it right now, and the season's 10% over already. So I don't know. Without Porzingis, I don't think they're going to win enough games. I don't think he's quite having the season that I thought he might have, but he's going to win an MVP someday. I don't think it's going to be him this year. I haven't seen a narrative yet, though. I mean, maybe there's something in Philly right now if they can keep it going around Embiid. He's playing pretty awesome right now. I thought at one point he would win one. Maybe this is his year.
Yeah, I think people would have said Luka was the odds-on favorite, but I think you're totally right. Not enough wins, not a great start, and then with him out, there's a real like void, like kind of a vacuum, right? Yeah. And I think people said last season that Embiid might win, although before the season started, and then they saw what kind of a dumpster fire the 76ers were, and it wasn't possible. So I think you're right. Embiid might be a potential. I also think. Or I guess I put it this way. I thought it was kind of AD's to lose. Ooh. They're going to have the best record. He'll probably score the most points per game.
Can you be the MVP and not the best player on your team?
Well, I don't know. Okay, so you don't think he's the best player on your team?
Well, I mean, who won the Finals MVP last year?
Yeah, sure. And that was great. That was the end of, maybe some people could say that was like the end of LeBron James's like individual award season. And now it's AD's turn. I don't know. I mean, I guess it'd be interesting to think about like what the internal conversations are like that, or if they're even having them. Yeah. If LeBron is like, hey, this year we're going to win you the MVP.
He's got to push for it, right? I think that if you want to go that way, LeBron has to start the PR campaign soon for AD and be like, because he did kind of last year for defensive player of the year, but then if he wants him to win MVP, he's got to start really like forcing the issue and talking about it and almost like seeding his voter contingent, because there's a certain level of number of voters, right, that are just going to vote for him for MVP if they're good, so.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think if if he's decided to do that, he's already decided. And if he's going to do it, he's already decided when to do it. Like this player, unlike any other player, is a master of the media.
No kidding.
And I think he'd know like when to say, and AD should be the MVP.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know that he'll say it too early or too late. So
yeah, he's got to capture that zeitgeist, right? When they hit the wave, he's got to be like, all right, this is the time. And
when I look in the camera and say,
AD's
this
the
person right here is
MVP.
our number one
Yeah,
player.
he could do it.
Yeah,
he definitely could do it. And I kind of thought last year he might do that, but he just went defensive player of the year, and he's so good that it's tough for me to see that people would take it seriously enough. You know, I don't know. He's got to be a little lesser than what he's been for those words to ring true with people. I mean, he risks like people being like, yeah, okay, you're just saying, you know, pantomiming that, but you don't really mean that. You're going to hit the playoffs and you're going to want to be finals MVP again.
I know. Yeah, right. This is great. Like, to think about what the spin room is for his like media group of like, okay, so where do we want to go and how do we do this? Right?
Can we get in on that too?
Yeah. Like, even if he wants AD to win, like, you know, like, is promoting him beneficial, you know, right. Or it will ring hollow or seem like he's, you know, being too modest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, man, this has been so much fun. We'll have to do it again if you're into it, if you had fun.
Yeah, I'm loving it. This is great. Yeah,
all right.
Definitely.
And NBA talk, man. All right, here's the outro. Thank you for listening to the 19-9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. It helps keep us going. We also have links to all of 19-9's social media so you never miss a release. Until next time.